Crazy Milei has done it. That chainsaw-wielding wacko has been slicing and dicing in Argentina, and he's absolutely crushing. The standard of living there is increasing. People are doing better. That he got so much negative news and press saying he was going to ruin everything, and we are seeing all of his work pay off. I think North America, Canada in particular right now, has so much to learn about what he did, how this government spending changing is actually making people richer in the long run. But obviously we saw this devastating news about the fiscal situation of Canada recently. So let's get into the numbers so we could see how North America could be doing so much better than we are now. Lots to learn here. Let's get into it.
It's now been just over a year since Argentinian President Javier Milei took office. And, well, things are going pretty great for him. He successfully flipped both Argentina's trade and fiscal deficits, allowing Argentina to run consecutive primary surpluses for the first time in ages. Inflation has come down from its heady highs, allowing the central bank to finally cut interest rates, and hopefully paving the way for the V-shaped recovery that Milei has long promised. But perhaps most impressively, Milei's approval rating has actually gone up in the past few months, with the latest morning consult polling giving him an astonishing net approval rating of plus 37. So in this video, we're going to take another look at Milei's presidency and ask whether his apparent success could be replicated elsewhere.
Look at that guy, just sitting there, hands on his belt, just having a good time.
As regular viewers probably already know, Milei came to power a year ago promising to take a proverbial chainsaw to the state in an attempt to balance the budget and bring macroeconomic stability. Within just a few weeks, he had abolished 10 of Argentina's 18 government ministries, halted the vast majority of public infrastructure projects, and dramatically cut fiscal transfers to provincial governments. He also devalued Argentina's currency, the peso, by 50%, and then implemented what's known as a crawling peg, whereby its value continued to fall by 2% each month, as part of an attempt to bring its official value closer to its market rate. This was both to simplify Argentina's currency regime, thereby facilitating more investment, and to force Argentinian households and businesses to import less. These policies had two.
Obviously, a stabilization of a currency is just going to make it that much better and more interesting for foreign investors to want to bring money into the country. I mean, Canada, obviously, we've got things with our taxes and our other reasons that people are not wanting to come. Obviously, questionable leadership. But we also, right now, there's pros and cons, right? Like the Canadian dollar is pretty weak compared to USD. So there is some level of interest of hey, man, we're getting a bit of a premium if this ever corrects. But at the same time, it's hard to kind of plan your business around oh, Canada's getting crushed right now, the Canadian dollar. So, some level of currency stabilization is always a good thing.
Two immediate consequences. The first was a dramatic decrease in GDP, with Argentina's economy shrinking by about 3.5% this year, because cuts to government spending meant that Argentinian households had less cash to spend. This also triggered a dramatic increase in poverty, with the relative poverty rate rising from 40% to 53%. Second, there was a spike in inflation, thanks to the depreciation of the peso. Month-on-month inflation jumped from 12.8% in November 2023 to an all-time high of 25.5% in December 2023, Milei's first month in charge. For context, this would translate.
That was really funny too, because his first month in charge, they were like, oh, look, he's caused so much inflation, instantly in 1 month. He did all this. Yeah, he's obviously doing some things, but they were acting like, oh, he's ruined everything. In 1 month, inflation's up.
To a year-on-year rate, which is usually how inflation is measured, of about 1,400%. Now, this was unsurprising, and Milei did warn the electorate that his policies would entail some economic turmoil, but this really was quite an upheaval. While Milei's approval ratings stayed impressively high, with most pollsters putting him above 50%, a couple of months ago there was a sense that their patience was waning somewhat. His approval ratings were ticking down slightly, inflation was stubbornly high, and the recession was deepening. However, in the past few months, things have started looking up. Month-on-month inflation has fallen from a peak of 25% last December down to about 3% for the past few months. This is obviously high by international standards, but it's low by Argentinian standards, and perhaps more.
And a big reason that was able to fall is less government intervention. So the problem is when you have governments increasing spending, or in Canada's case, obviously we had increased immigration to keep the GDP artificially high, we weren't actually producing anything, and our spending was so high. So that's why when you look at this article and you go, oh man, Canada's deficit is now forecast to be 62 billion, more than 50% higher than the 40 billion projection contained in Freeland's spring budget, because we've, like, the Liberal government has always smashed through their deficit. And the problem is this deficit spending is not productive at all, because you're just spending without actually creating. And so when your GDP is lower than your deficit year over year, that's scary, especially when you start to factor in real interest rates. So if interest rates are starting to get higher than inflation, and then also your GDP is not increasing, just your debt is, it's like, okay, so now your debt payments are going up, but the money amount is not going up, which is horrible for the actual government trying to pay off debt. And then it's going to make the deficit worse. There's a bunch of stuff. Obviously, we can go into that in another video. But the fact is, when you do this level of spending and you're not creating, it's a double whammy, where Milei said, okay, if we are not able to create right now, the only thing that we can do is cut. And that starts to bring these numbers down, which ended up helping.
More importantly, it's lower than Argentina's average wage growth. Argentinian wages are currently growing by about 6%, which means, in real terms, that wages are growing at about 2 or 3% month on month, their fastest rate in quite some time. The relative poverty rate has also fallen from its recent peak, going from 53% in June to 49% in October. In November, low inflation allowed the central bank to lower its benchmark rate for the first time in nearly 6 months, from 40% to 35%. There are also some tentative signs that the economy is rebalancing towards investment and exports, as Milei had hoped. For context, GDP is usually defined as the sum of 4 things: domestic consumption, government spending, investment, and net exports, i.e. your exports minus your imports. Milei believes that Argentina's GDP involves too much consumption and government spending, and hopes that the coming recovery will be driven more by investment and exports. And, well, it looks like this is sort of happening. In the first 7 months of 2024, the latest period for which we have data, exports reached $45.4 billion, an increase of 14.8% on the same period last year, while imports totaled just $33.1 billion, a decrease of 25.9% year on year. In the aggregate, this means that Argentina ran a $12.3 billion trade surplus in this time, compared to a $5.2 billion trade deficit during the same period last year.
Which is crazy, because now you're talking an $18 billion swing. And for, an economy as small as Argentina's, that's massive. But even for Canada, that would be crazy. And we have the ability to do this because they're talking about exports. Most of it, obviously, going to be resources. Canada is a resource-rich nation. We have the ability to set up pipelines. We have the ability to absolutely be pumping out all sorts of resources. And here's why I think this is such a missed opportunity. And they're going to talk about it in the video, some of the things that they're exporting and whatever. But I've mentioned this before, which is Norway's sovereign wealth fund, or the government pension fund. What people don't understand is how massive this is for a country like Norway, also known as the oil fund. Okay, so obviously they're not even greenwashing it or anything like that. They're just calling it the oil fund. It was established in 1990 to invest the surplus revenues of the Norwegian petroleum sector. And as of November 2024, it has over 1.74 trillion in assets, okay? The total amount owing in sovereign debt in Canada is around 1.2 trillion. So they have more than Canada owes on a nation that only has a population of 5.2 million versus Canada, who has 40.1 million. That's obviously delayed. We got a bunch of people floating around who aren't included in that. But if this tiny nation can produce enough oil and petroleum and these natural resources that they can be in a 1.7 trillion surplus in assets under management, we can do this in Canada as well. And because this is the thing that people don't understand. We can have government spending if money's being created through production. So if the GDP is there, if the production is there, we can actually do this. So when people say like, oh, what about healthcare? What about all these things? Like, it would actually be better for Canada to become an absolute natural resource just behemoth, because then all of this crazy spending that we're used to in Canada could be done. And as you've seen, even with like rates going down and the prices being affected, they had wages going up. And Canada is in this position right now where like for example, house prices. People talk about house prices needing to come down because they've gotten so crazy and all that other stuff, and they have gone up. The problem is our entire economy is based on house prices right now. Not the entire economy, but enough of it where if house prices come down from where they currently are, it would be so economically devastating that we probably wouldn't be able to recover for a decade. So what's more likely is we can produce more. The more we produce, the more we create, we can actually increase wages. And then if house prices become less, speculative of people having to like put their money into it and protect it, we can actually have house prices slowly tick up. If prices go back to what they were, going up 2% a year, 3% a year, but wages are going up 6% a year, and we're starting to earn this. Now, without prices having to fall, they can become more affordable again. So there's a lot of opportunity here that we're seeing from Argentina. Let's get into some of the other stuff that they're talking about here, because this was such a cool, exciting video to see that they're having this positive results.
Milei and the Argentinian government are confident that exports will continue to grow in the coming years, largely thanks to demand for commodities like lithium and copper, which are required for the energy transition and are relatively abundant in Argentina, but also because of shale. Argentina actually has one of the biggest shale oil and gas deposits in the world, called Vaca Muerta, in the Patagonian desert. But underinvestment and chronic mismanagement by the government and Argentina's big...
What does Vaca Muerta translate to? I thought it was that. It translates to dead cow. That's so weird. Okay, well, there you go. Shout out to the Argentinians. I have no idea. Somebody, if you guys know, if there's any Spanish speakers, why it's dead cow, let me know. That's hilarious.
Energy firms have left it largely undeveloped. Nonetheless, the deposit has already helped Argentina run an energy surplus. In other words, exporting more energy than it imports, for the first time since 2011. And exports will only grow if Milei can make more progress on Vaca Muerta's growing pipeline network. Investment is a bit murkier, cash is flowing into Argentinian stocks, and Milei's government says it expects its reforms to attract up to $15 billion in investment next year. In other signs that investor confidence is improving, Argentinian bonds have doubled in value since Milei came to office, and in November, Argentina's credit rating was upgraded, although it's still 7 notches below investment grade. This has all been great news for Milei personally. According to the latest Morning Consult polling from last week, his net approval rating now sits at plus 37, up about 5 points from a few months ago and the second highest in the world after just India's Narendra Modi. Now, to be clear, this isn't to say that everything's going perfect. The economy is still in recession after all. Nonetheless, the fact that in just a year, Milei has successfully flipped Argentina's fiscal and trade deficits, all while maintaining sky-high approval ratings, is undeniably impressive.
Yeah, and of course, of course not everything is going perfect. And an economy is a giant ship. So turning that ship is going to take a long time. That being said, if you're seeing this level of performance in the first year, yeah, this is great trends that we want to see of this continuing to go this way. Absolutely.
His apparent success in Argentina has sparked talk about whether his anti-state program could be replicated elsewhere. In many countries, there's a widespread sense, especially on the right, that the state is too bloated, and people like Elon Musk, who's currently heading up Trump's Department of Government Efficiency, have looked to Milei for inspiration.
I'm actually happy that they're getting an African American in charge of the Department of Government Efficiency.
But there are at least 2 reasons that other politicians might struggle to replicate Milei's success. The first is that it's surprisingly complicated. Milei's international admirers often talk as if he just deleted a whole load of useless government departments, and that was it. But that's not quite true. Milei's cuts to government spending have been accompanied by a whole load of complicated technocratic reforms, especially around Argentina's currency and central bank, and it has been nowhere near as simple a process as is sometimes made out. And second, Argentinians knew what they were getting when they voted for Milei, who campaigned promising short-term economic pain for long-term gain, pitching himself as the necessary antidote to Argentina's chronic economic woes.
Yeah, I think that's the big difference is Argentinians were ready to know that they were going to be in this recession. And I think, in Canada in particular, obviously we are having a GDP per capita recession, which means everybody's already kind of feeling it. So that just the news is going, oh, we're not in a recession, we're in a vibe session. So if people were prepared, hey guys, there's going to be some cuts. Short term, this is going to suck. We can reevaluate. We can rebuild the foundations. We just don't have a strong enough leader who's ready to actually do this. Like, you need somebody who's almost divisive enough, who's going to come in and be like, yeah, guys, this is going to suck. We're going to turn things around and then fix it. Most people are like, no, I'm just going to fix it. I'm gonna do better. It's gonna be so much better under me. Which, like, we need some level of pain to refocus. Like, I mean, especially with how much money we are spending as the government. Like, these cuts will be felt in the economy if they were to cut, but the amount of private investment and other things that can be switched to, because right now Canada and even America in a sense are kind of getting their energy through cocaine, which is government spending. And yeah, sure, you're going to get energy, you're going to be able to stay up a little bit longer, but you're going to pay for it down the road eventually. So we could, get some good sleeps. We're not going to have as much fun for a little bit, and then we can rebuild. But that's it for today's video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Obviously a little bit different than what I was doing before. Comment down below if you like this one. Thanks for sticking around, and have a great rest of your day.